everybody out there. This is Hillary Patterson again with some tips to help you do better in your pilot job career search. I've been putting out a lot of videos. I have some others on the channel. Please subscribe and like. I'm trying to put some information out there from things that I have seen, weaknesses in interviews, how to answer certain questions, just a lot of things to help people maybe not make those mistakes as they're starting out their career. So today we're going to talk about how to answer the "have you ever failed a check ride" question. Most likely that will be in every interview that you take throughout your career. Hopefully you only have a few pilot interviews until you get to, the dream job. But I want to talk about this because failures can affect your career. They can affect your chances at getting jobs. They can even prevent you from getting jobs if they're airline failures. So primary flight training failures don't have as much weight unless you have several of them. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how we look at that in an interview. But airline failures have much weight when it comes to job interviews and your job history. And those airline failures are going to follow you your whole career. So if you're not ready, please don't take that leap. And we'll talk about being ready in this video. But lately, probably over the past year, I am seeing more and more and more pilot resumes with more than one airline failure on them. Sometimes 2 to 3 to 4. I'm sorry, but if you have 3 or 4, you're cutting down your job pool by quite a bit. The general rule of thumb is no more than 3. And even 3, it's iffy. You better have a lot of other good stuff to counteract it. So, I see pilots, they think they're ready for that airline job and they jump into it when they're not ready. And, then we see the failures and resignations. I'm sorry, but we know how that works. When you're not doing well in training, they'll offer you a resignation. That's so that it's not, technically a failure in your record. But looking at a resume, if you've been at an airline less than 6 months, then I pretty much know the story. Less than 6 months means you probably didn't make it through training. Why didn't you make it through training? Did you fail? Oh, they let you resign because you weren't doing well. Seems to be a lot of people who don't finish training. There's a lot of dead family members. That's probably the most common excuse is, something's happening to some family member and you had to drop out of training. I'm not minimizing that. But I think some of the, if something really bad is going on, that's terrible. And I'm not minimizing that. But I do believe that sometimes that's not entirely truthful. Because, every time there's an interview, people get sick and people die, it seems like. Okay, so let's talk about, I've kind of gotten on my soapbox about the failures because these things, they follow you. Airline failures follow you your whole career. So please put a lot of thought into taking that airline job, and are you ready for that training? That training is extremely intense. It's if you haven't been through it, like 121 training, it's like nothing you ever experienced before. You thought flight training was rough. Airline training is intense and there's a lot of information. If you're not ready and you're not ready to put your life on hold for 3 or 4 months to get through training, you put your family on hold, everything goes on hold, you go to training. So if your family isn't ready to support that and you're not in the mental space to do it, don't take that job. Don't risk failing training. It's going to hurt you. So please be prepared. But let's talk about, if you have had checkride or airline failures, how to address that and kind of hopefully turn it into a positive. I know a lot of people get sometimes anxious about these questions. Please don't be. They don't mean you're not going to get the job. One or two primary flight training check ride failures um, probably isn't very significant, depending on what the failures were on, and I'll cover that a little bit too. Um, so don't feel uncomfortable, like I'm not going to get this job, if I tell them about my check ride. I'm going to give you some tips to hopefully help you answer those questions well, and hopefully you'll be a little bit more comfortable going into those interviews and answering these type of questions. So full disclosure. So, they're going to ask the question, have you ever failed any check rides? And that means primary flight training, and it also means if you've been at an airline, like maybe you've been at a 135 airline and now you're going for a 121 job or whatever, those count too. Any kind of checks at a company that, or check rides, or recurrent checks or anything like that, those count. So full disclosure, you want to mention all of those things. The best approach to take when answering this question is be humble, be honest, and own it. Okay, so full disclosure and own it. It's not your instructor's fault you failed. It's not the examiner's fault because he was a jerk. It's not the weather's fault. It was your fault that you failed that check ride. And that's how you need to walk in there in that mindset. Own it. Talk about it. And tell us what you learned from it. How did that develop you as a pilot? Because I guarantee we all make mistakes, in flight training or just in our careers. And usually when we do that, we don't forget and we don't make that mistake again. I think you can remember very clearly what you failed on that check ride and what went wrong. I had somebody tell me they didn't remember why they failed, and I'm thinking, no, I'm sure you do. I think those are painful moments for us in our journey as a pilot, but we can talk about them and not feel bad. So that's what you want to do. So completely own it. It's your mistake. Don't try blaming it on other things. That is a red flag. If you're and I've seen people do that so many times. It's not their fault, it's something else's fault. Do not do that, because that's lowering your your points on the interview. Explain what you learned from it. Tell us how it's not going to happen again, what you did to correct that problem. And if you're a CFI or something like that, if you're interviewing and you've been working as a CFI, you'll probably get asked, well, what are you going to do to make sure your students don't make the same mistakes that you did? So that's a pretty common question. They just want to see that you understand the mistake, that you own the mistake, and that you learned from the mistake. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. If it's a primary flight training failure, unless you have failed every check ride during your flight training, it's going to be okay. Another thing that sort of works to your favor is if you fail on like a known common fail item. A really common one I see is power off 180 in the commercial. It's a very precision maneuver. You've got to put your judgment into a lot of moving pieces to make that work out right. It's a common fail item. So if we hear that, you failed your commercial check ride, it's the only one you failed, and you failed on that, we're like, okay, a lot of people fail on that. No big deal. It depends on what it is as well. And the best advice I can say, just be honest and humble and own it. And you'll get through it fine. So for primary flight training failures, that's a route to go. Now, airline failures, let's talk about that. So if you've been at a 135 airline, working at another airline to build time, or you made the jump, say, to a regional airline, and you weren't prepared. That happens to a lot of people. I see that so much these days. You weren't prepared, and so you didn't complete training successfully. They may have let you resign, whatever, but the fact is, you weren't successful in training. Own it. Please own it. And just say, well, they let me resign. This is what was going on. And then you need to add to that, what have you done since then? So you're applying for the next job now, right? After you had that failure. So you're talking to the recruiter. Then I'm going to want to know, okay, so you took the leap. You tried the, very intense airline training and you didn't make it. So what was your next move after that? What did you do? You were weak on something. What did you do to fix that? Because you need to show me as your next potential employer that you're not going to make that same mistake with me. Now, if you did no additional training and you just thought, oh, I'm just going to jump to another airline, that's probably not a good answer. Hold on, I gotta get some water. Lots of talking. So make sure you do something, and I'll give you some ideas. I have some ideas at the end of ways that you can make yourself look a little better when answering these questions. I talked about if you're at an airline less than 6 months, that pretty much tells us you didn't pass training. So I don't care what the reason is you say. Most typically it's a training issue. Sometimes it's a family issue, which is the most popular excuse. How many check ride failures are bad, right? Because there is a limit. So if you have 1 or 2 primary training check rides, no big deal. Airline check rides, every single one of them is bad. They will follow you the rest of your career. So I cannot get on my soapbox enough about be prepared. This stuff takes a lot of studying and people think they're prepared. You wouldn't believe this, but I have seen many resumes of pilots that have multiple 121 airline failures, like regional. They went from one regional, they were there 2 or 3 months, didn't make it. Then they went to another regional and they were there for a few months. And then they were at another one. If you have 3, you have significantly decreased your chances of getting a job. You might as well find a different path for your pilot career at that point. If you have 3 airline failures, that's usually the rule of thumb. If it's 3 or more, is a no. Primary training, you could have 3, kind of depending on what they are. Not such a big deal. Not a career killer. The only thing with primary training that's really going to be a career killer is if you failed every single check ride. Then that tells us maybe they're a good pilot, but they just struggle passing tests. And that could be the problem. But you've got to figure out how to get around that and confront it. So if you haven't done that in 5 check rides, then what is happening? Something's not working. So primary training, I talk to a lot of people who are very, very worried about primary training check ride failures. They do not have as much weight as airline. Airline have a lot of weight. So you can have a black mark in your PREA forever. So let's talk about a few things you can do that shows that you've overcome those weaknesses, right? Because that's what you want to show is I had a weakness. I did something to correct it, and it won't happen again. So let's talk about, I've really been preaching about those airline failures, whether it's a 135 airline, whether it's 121, it's an airline. So the best thing you can do, because think about this, if you went to a regional or something like that and you didn't pass training, the next training is going to be the same or harder. So do you really want to just jump right back in? Do you think that that's the best thing for you to do? It's probably not. And it's not really going to look good to the next interviewer either, because the first question in their mind is, are they going to pass training here? They didn't pass it there, and our training's very similar. So a good thing to do would be to, humble yourself and take a step back and realize that maybe you need some more experience. Go get a 135 job. Maybe you didn't do that. Maybe you went right from CFI to airline and you struggled. Go do some 135 flying. Go do some smaller airline flying to kind of get you a little bit more spooled up with things. And then go back. Then you can say in your interview, well, yes, I wasn't ready. I struggled in training a little bit, so I knew that I needed to do more. So I went and I, flew here for a year or 6 months or whatever to improve my skill set. And now I'm ready. That is a great way to handle that. But if you're just coming from one airline to another, how do I know that you're not going to be just as weak? So think about that. If you're a pilot out there that's in that type of situation, you really need to think about, because if you do that second failure, your chances of getting jobs has gone down probably 50% if you have 2 failures. So, and 3, hang it up. Let's see here, looking at my notes. Okay, so if you're a CFI and you have had training failures, they'll probably ask you, what did you do to correct it? How do you make sure your students don't make that mistake? So tell them, you probably have a really good answer of what you did to make sure that thing that you failed on doesn't happen again. And just tell them that. And that is usually a satisfactory answer. If you're not a CFI, maybe you didn't want to be a CFI to build time, but you're, that pilot that is going for your airline job, and, you've built your time and you have a couple primary training checkride failures. Just do the things I said. Just own it. Tell us what you've done since. Maybe if it was an instrument check ride or a double I check ride and it was a procedural issue, then show, hey, yeah, I was a little weak there. I hadn't done a lot of those approaches. I have gotten in a sim. I have done this and this and this to correct the problem. That's really all they want to see for the answer to that question is own it. Own it and learn from it. And if you can do that in your interview, you're going to do a great job. So I'll be putting out more videos. Please put something in the comments about something that you'd like me to speak on. And if it's a topic that's in my area of expertise, I'll put out a little video about it. So I hope this helped. I really hope this helps those of you who are out there going for those interviews or soon to be going for those interviews, so that you don't feel so anxious about this question. Hopefully that helps. And I will see you all soon with another video. Until then.